Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As you come in to the webinar, please tell us a little bit about yourself. We do have over 400 folks registered for this training, so we will give them just another minute to find their way into the room. Thank you so much for coming in and taking part of that poll. Loving all of the organizations and different categories of folks with us. It is 9:30 and we do have a wonderful group with us. So we'll leave the poll up for just about another 30 seconds and then we'll begin. Thank you, everybody. Very appreciative of you taking part in this poll. Welcome, welcome. I wanted to begin by first giving you our absolute most heartfelt welcome to everyone. We recognize there are so many places that you can be right now. So we're really grateful that you chose to share your time with us as we grow into a more skilled provider community. I really want to acknowledge, before we get into all of it, the incredibly valuable work that each and every one of you do. And I want to celebrate you for a moment. So many of you are in the direct service space and community organizations, as we just saw in the poll. And we know the dedicated heart-centered work that it takes to continue each day. So thank you, thank you, thank you. My name is Jody Weiner. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Learning and Development Specialist here at Sacramento Steps Forward. It's my honor to provide our COCU, our trainings, with the intention of not only best practices, but to provide you impactful, purposeful, and engaging learning experiences that leave you feeling resourced and supported. Today, we are supported by our moderator. Thank you. We are supported by our moderator, Catherine Daria, who will provide us some helpful messaging and tech support throughout our time and before we leave our session today. Before we begin, I just want to give you a few key points to ensure a smooth experience. This webinar is closed caption for accessibility, and it's part of our 2024 required COC and ESG provider and staff training series. Additionally, we're recording this session, so you'll receive a link afterwards with the slide deck and many of the handouts mentioned here during the webinar, so you can revisit this content anytime. Please note that the chat function is disabled, but we highly encourage the use of the reactions feature and encourage you to respond to any polls as they are presented. We are set for a really insightful and engaging session with material that can be heavy. It can be activating and somewhat uncomfortable. And this is the subject matter that calls to us in the world, right? Some of us have had our own lived experiences with the subject matter, and we encourage you at any point, as this content may be uncomfortable, I encourage you to step away if needed and to honor your boundaries. This work can be, especially the subject matter, domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault. It's heavy, and we want to acknowledge that. So please recognize your own capacity to stay present. And remember, you're going to get a copy of everything that we're sharing today. This 3-hour learning experience with ample breaks comprehensively covers the complex dynamics of domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault, privacy and confidentiality, safety planning, and including how to handle emergency situations at access points that are not explicitly designated for persons fleeing domestic violence, human trafficking, or sexual assault. Our presenters, wonderful, are dedicated to impacting lives and making a difference. They're really special in the community, doing powerful work on their own. Together, we get to make a bigger difference in the lives that we touch. They'll share a bit about their work, and contact information will be shared in a thank you email. Michelle Reedus will start us off with Sacramento Steps Forward, and we'll be discussing the 6 essential elements of Survivor Coordinated Access System, we call S-CAS, and ways to engage victim service providers, eligibility requirements, and more. We will learn about anti-human trafficking from Rodger Freeman with International Rescue Committee. Leander Loh with Supportive Weave Organization will provide details and resources about human trafficking. And we will finish with our third collaborator with Family Justice Center, Joyce, Bilyeau, who will be sharing about domestic violence, safety planning, and more. There will be a break between our 3 partner organizations where you can leave your questions. We will do our best to answer all submitted questions at the end of our presentation during the Q&A portion, and as they come up and our presenters are available, we'll respond to them as well. With all of that goodness aside, I'm so excited. I am excited for this work. And I will turn over the microphone and presentation to Michelle Reedus. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jody. Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Reedus, Director of CAS Operations here at SSF. We're so glad to have you all here today. So today I'm going to be talking about the Survivor Coordinated Access System, raising awareness to improve survivor experiences and assessments in the homeless response system. Next slide. So just a content warning for everyone. Jody already mentioned this, but please feel free to take some space or step out if you need to at any point during this presentation. So in this discussion, I will be talking about what is the Survivor Coordinated Access System, which we call S-CAS. I will review the 6 essential elements of S-CAS and how to integrate them into your casework and how to get access to community resources and tools to better serve your clients. So here's a quick brief overview look of domestic violence and human trafficking. So domestic violence, DV is 30 to 50% higher for non-white women. 1 in 4 women versus 1 in 9 men equals severe intimate partner violence, physical sexual violence, and stalking. 21 to 60% of intimate partner violence survivors lose their jobs. Some more statistics. First, California Anti-Trafficking Bill in 2005 is one of the largest U.S. human trafficking sites, extensive borders, large immigrant native populations, strong economy. To 2018 reported cases, 1,656 human trafficking cases were reported, 1,226 sex trafficking cases were reported, 151 labor trafficking cases were reported, and 169 unspecified cases were reported. So we like to show these demographics and statistics to give you all an idea of how often this is occurring right now in California. Next slide. Okay, so survivor caste system. So the survivor caste system started, it was that the COC was awarded funding specifically for the HUD definition of Category 4 homeless, which is fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence. As a part of the award, HUD required COCs to provide safe and confidential access through the Survivor Coordinated Access System. This new system is aimed to be inclusive of victim service providers and those with training and knowledge for how to best support survivors in our community. Next slide. So the 6 essential elements of S-CAS is confidentiality, access, assessment, problem solving, and prioritization. All efforts will be made to protect the rights, privacy, and safety of survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, human trafficking, sexual assault, or stalking. Programs are prohibited to deny, terminate, or evict a person as a direct result of the fact that the applicant or tenant is or has been a victim of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. If the applicant or tenant otherwise qualifies for admission, assistance, participation, or occupancy. Next slide. All right, Category 4 homelessness. So this is the definition: fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, human trafficking, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or other dangerous or life-threatening conditions that relate to violence against the individual or a family member, including a child, that has either taken place within the individual's or family's primary nighttime residence or has made the individual or family afraid to return to their primary nighttime residence and has no other residence and lacks the resources or support networks to obtain other permanent housing. So in order for a client to participate in the S-CAS, they do have to meet this category of homelessness. Next slide. And this is a HUD definition of chronic homelessness. So chronically homeless is defined as living in a place not meant for human habitation, a safe haven, or in an emergency shelter, and has been homeless for at least 12 months or on at least 4 separate occasions in the last 3 years. We typically, if a client has verified chronic homeless, then they are considered or prioritized for PSH housing or PH housing as well. Next slide. Okay, so accessing S-CAS. So in order to access S-CAS, the provider identifies that the survivor is in need of survivor-specific resources and services. From then, the provider refers the survivor to a victim service access point. The victim service access point establishes eligibility and administers prioritization questions and assessments. From there, the victim service provider access point will add the client to the S-CAS waitlist to be prioritized for housing. And then as open units become available, survivors are referred from S-CAS priority list. I also want to mention here that when we have openings within our standard CAS housing system, we also consider the clients from this system for those units as well. Next slide. So eligibility requirements. So we kind of went over this already, but For rapid rehousing, survivors must meet the Category 4 homelessness to be considered for the S-CAS rapid rehousing programs. And then for permanent supportive housing, they have to meet the Category 4 homelessness. They have to have verified chronic homelessness, a certified disability. Income must be below 30%, must have their identification documents as well as a social security card. Next slide. Okay, so here are a few of the S-CAS housing programs that we refer our clients to. So we have Opening Doors, which is a rapid rehousing program. They have 20 rapid rehousing units. My sister's house, they have 10 rapid rehousing units. Shelter Inc. has 11 rapid rehousing units with 27 beds. Lao Family Community Development, they have 13 rapid rehousing units. And then Weave has 9 PSH family units, 2 to 5 persons. And rapid rehousing is a program that provides short-term and medium-term rental assistance. The clients can stay in the program anywhere from 4 to 24 months. And it's really aimed to assist clients in achieving self-sufficiency and be able to afford rent on their own at the end of services. And then the tenant-based voucher rental assistance and supportive services program is through SHRA, through the Shelter Plus Care Voucher Program. This program can serve up to 2 to 5 persons, provided with no maximum term and ongoing case management to survivors. Next slide. And here's a list of our victim service providers. So if you have a client who is experiencing domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, you can get connected with these agencies. So we have Weave. They primarily work with domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual assault. Opening Doors, they serve populations experiencing human trafficking and refugees. My sister's house, they also serve domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault. And then Shelter Inc., domestic violence, Lao Family Community Development. They serve populations experiencing domestic violence, human trafficking, as well as sexual assault. And then we have Community Against Sexual Harm, short for CASH. They primarily serve clients who are experiencing sex trafficking. And then we have Sacramento Regional Family Justice Center. They provide services for domestic violence, elder abuse, human trafficking, sexual assault, and child abuse. Next slide. And continue on here, we have International Rescue Committee, City of Refuge, Bridging Initiatives International, which also they will be onboarding a new rapid rehousing and transitional housing program with us here shortly. And that's going to be specifically for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. We have the Intertribal Council of California, Three Strands Global Foundation, and Connect to Change. So some better ways to serve survivors: ensure safe and confidential access. This is something that we emphasize here at SSF. We make sure that we keep things confidential. We have a separate case conferencing, aside from our other case conferencing groups, where we specifically talk about clients that are on the S-CAS priority list. And in that meeting, we do not discuss names. All of the clients have unique identifiers. And so that's how we maintain confidentiality within our work. Broaden assessment tools and process. So making sure that assessments include the most up-to-date best practices in regards to when you're working with survivors, as well as being trauma-informed when you're asking those questions. A lot of times, survivors are meeting with you, whether it's for the first time, second time, they've been asked those questions so many times. So being more trauma-informed when you are administering those assessment tools, and just being really understanding and caring during that process. reference practical considerations. So researching evidence-based practices, attending trainings like today, learning more information about how to best serve your clients, and then evaluate the coordinated entry system. This is something that we are doing right now here at SSF. We are currently working on trying to implement a separate database for our victim service providers to ensure that we keep their information and their data completely confidential. So this is something that's in the works. We have a lot to do with that as far as like configuration and building the system, but it's something that we're really excited about because we want to ensure that clients are treated with respect and their information is confidential at all times, especially when you are someone experiencing domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, etc. Next slide, please. And here are some more resources. These are going to be really helpful for you, especially when you're working with clients. I used to be a social worker in the field, so I would use some of these resources, especially like after hours and maybe no one's around and your client's experiencing a crisis. This will be great to share these resources with your client at that first intake visit so that they have like go-to resources that they can go to when they're in crisis. I know a lot of these options do provide the opportunity to text as well as call. So this PowerPoint will be sent to you all, and I just truly recommend saving these for your clients, even if you're not working as a victim service provider. But we also know that there's so many clients that are not connected to a victim service provider that can be experiencing domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking. So definitely want to emphasize that. Next slide. Perfect. Okay. Any questions anyone have?
Michelle, while we still have you, anything you'd like to add in terms of, there was a question about how to get a client onto the S-CAS list. In addition to reaching out to the victim service providers that we have here on the call and that's been listed on the resource list, any other specifics that you'd like to add onto this response?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, if you have a client who meets criteria, they are experiencing domestic violence, human trafficking, or sexual assault, my first recommendation is going to be to try to connect with one of the victim service providers that we listed here in the slides. They will be able to do like a call and intake, and then they'll connect that client with a caseworker and advocate. And then from then on, that client will then be added to the priority list, and then they will be able to receive those services. So that would be the very first way to do that. You can also reach out to us directly, and we can also facilitate that. Right now in the system, it's just myself and Slazine. We will be hiring for another team member, but we can also facilitate that connection as well if you have a client who needs support with getting connected. That's a really great question. Any other questions? Can you explain income eligibility again, please? And thank you. Yes. So as far as income eligibility, that's going to be different for each program, but the broad over or eligibility is income under 30%, but that's only for PSH. For rapid rehousing, for most programs, there's not a income requirement. How may we meet you directly? I can most certainly put my information in the chat. I don't know if we have the chat available, but I could put my email in this question and answer box. You can definitely reach out to me directly. Hi, I work with clients to process applications for permanent supportive housing. Our vital form is made by HUD, and we have gotten feedback that it's not very trauma informed. How we can provide support for people who want to fill it out, their application. That is Interesting. So form is made by HUD. Yeah, the forms usually made by HUD are compliant. But Victoria, if you want to send me that application, I'll be happy to meet with you and we can work on that together. I can put my email here in the chat. But typically the forms that are from like the VAWA's page, like I think they have like an intake form or transfer request. Those are typically what HUD recommends. Are there resources for Sacramento only? Yes, Nancy, to my knowledge, these resources are for clients that are in Sacramento only. Does this apply to victims of past abuse but are still dealing with the effects of it? Yes, absolutely. Please, once this PowerPoint's sent out, please reach out. If the client has experienced past abuse, absolutely, they do qualify for services. All right, these are all great questions. Any other questions?
I think those are the ones that have been directed to this piece of the presentation, Michelle. And so thank you all for submitting those questions. And Michelle, thank you for joining us for this portion of the day. I know you have to head out soon. If you have any more survivor CAS system specific questions, we'll be sure to provide Michelle's direct email as well as the CAS team's general inbox so that you can be connected and get your tailored or your specific questions responded to. And so with that, we're gonna transition over to Jody again to introduce our next presenter. And then we will make sure to revisit the Q&A feature box in our bigger Q&A session at the bottom of this, at the end of this call.
Thanks, Nika. I wasn't prepared to introduce everybody again, but I'm super happy to. Michelle, thank you again so much for that very helpful information. Next up is Rodger Freeman with International Rescue Committee. And it's over to you, Rodger. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jody, for that kind introduction. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen and dive into my presentation. This morning, I had the privilege of starting us off talking about human trafficking, and our presentation this morning is directly designed for folks that work with people that are looking for housing. I've broken the training down into 3 components. I'm going to first talk about the definition of what human trafficking is. I'm going to give information about the abilities and ways to identify potential survivors of human trafficking. And lastly, I try to be a glass half full kind of person, so I'm going to follow up with programs that are there available to assist not only survivors of human trafficking, but to assist you as professionals. I don't expect in my 40-minute presentation this morning that I've been allotted that you're going to be experts in the field, but hopefully you'll have a better understanding of what human trafficking is, how to identify it, and know that there are resources are available, again, both to survivors and to you as professionals. A little bit about the IRC and about myself. The IRC is actually a nonprofit organization that was founded back in 1933. Prior to World War II, there were a lot of individuals and families that were both being displaced and killed. And unfortunately, they weren't nonprofits or governmental agencies helping those individuals. And the very famous scientist Albert Einstein went to European leaders and encouraged them to do something. They actually listened to Albert, and the IRC was formed. About 5 years later, the United States became a part of that collaborative. And since then, we're an agency that helps people that are in a place of harm to get to a place of home. We do a lot of our work overseas in places like Afghanistan and Ukraine, but we also have offices in the United States. Right now, we have 27 offices. The offices that I am currently in right now is located here in Sacramento at the intersection of Howe and Hurley. So if you'd ever like a tour or to meet our staff, I would love to arrange that. We've actually been providing services to refugees in this region since 1986. And for the last 8 years, we've also been providing services to human trafficking survivors. Primarily, our focus has been on labor trafficking survivors. And so primarily, that's going to be the information that I'm going to be focused on in my training today. As far as my background, real briefly, hopefully this is a Safe place to disclose that I have been in the social service field for almost 30 years. For 18 years, I had the pleasure of working at Weave, where I did everything from working in the front office to being an outreach person to being a supervisor of programs. For 4 years, I worked at UC Davis, both as an advocate and an educator at the medical center location and campus. And just last week, I celebrated my 7-year anniversary here at the IRC. Again, my name is Rodger Freeman. I am the anti-trafficking outreach and training specialist. I personally don't see clients now. What I get to do is the fun stuff is like be with you all today, providing information that I think is going to be hopefully helpful to you all and to potential clients that you come in contact with. I want to dive into the context of this information. And again, just want to buttress and focus on what Jody said. Some of this information is a little bit delicate to hear. So if you are a survivor, or if you do know of someone that is a survivor of human trafficking or a similar experience, please take care of yourself. But please know the reason I'm here is not to trigger anybody. I don't have any graphic pictures or graphic stories, but I do again want to acknowledge and remind folks this is kind of a challenging subject matter. So with that said, one of the most important things I wanted to stress today is what human trafficking is. And it's something that maybe you've seen a movie or a TV show about and you think you have an understanding of what it is, but there's actually law on the books. And back in 2000, when we had a functioning federal government that was largely done in the work by the United Nations, the federal government came up with a legal definition for all of us to use. And it really is broken down into 3 components. So for an individual to be labeled a survivor of human trafficking and then be able to benefit from all the services because of that label, a survivor needs to express that they experienced 3 things. The A is an action, that they were either induced, recruited, harbored, transported, provided, or obtained. Now, oftentimes with the clients that we've worked with over the last 8 years and nearly around 600 individuals, oftentimes our clients aren't only able to express that one of those actions occurred to them, but sometimes 2, 3, sometimes it's that whole row. But again, for an individual to meet that requirement, the federal definition, at least one of those actions had to have occurred to them. The M stands for means, and that's either through force, fraud, or coercion. Now, oftentimes in our society, I think in large part due to either the news or our entertainment industry, oftentimes there's this myth that all survivors of human trafficking are going to experience force, that they were going to be handcuffed to a bed or locked in a cage like an animal. And the reason that I chuckle under my breath there a little bit is not that it's funny or that that never happens, but for the clients that we've worked with, oftentimes the tool that most perpetrators use, it's the use of coercion. And I'll give you some specific examples of coercion in the next slide. The P stands for purpose. And a perpetrator is getting an individual to engage in an activity against their will, either doing something sexual in nature or something of value, either for money, drugs, or anything of value, or their physical labor. Now, real briefly, I just want to clarify some language this morning. I'm going to go ahead and interchange the word victim and survivor, partly because I am old school and been in this field so long that we used to call anybody that experienced this crime a victim. I think the word survivor is a better word to use personally because it acknowledges that person's experience, but doesn't put that heavy label of victim on them. But law enforcement, court systems, they still use it. So it's not inappropriate that I use that word, but for you all, I think I would encourage you to use the word survivor, please. The other part of the equation, I promised Jody that I would stay professional today. The person that is doing the exploitation, I have some strong language that I would like to use, but I will not. Instead, I will call that person either a trafficker, a criminal, a bad person. So get into this equation, person being exploited is a survivor victim, person doing the exploitation, we're going to call that person a bad person or a trafficker. So just wanted to clarify my language this morning. And I appreciate the feedback I'm getting with the emojis this morning too. Thank you. So as I promised, I said I'd give some more clarity on those different words that we were talking about as far as the tools that perpetrators will use. Again, with force, it can't be restraining someone. It could also be use of substances. Sometimes perpetrators will use substances to maintain control of their victim. Very much as you will hear about the power dynamics with intimate partner violence or domestic violence later in this training today, Oftentimes, perpetrators will use drugs and alcohol to maintain that power control over that victim so they can continue to manipulate them and benefit from that person's work. The fraud, oftentimes, especially when it comes to labor trafficking, I think it's very simple, a bait and switch. An individual is promised a job and a certain pay rate, and then once they start doing the job, either the tasks are different or the pay is far less than what they were promised. And when they come to that employer and voice their concerns, they're threatened that there's going to be some sort of consequence to them. So it's a very classic bait and switch. With coercion, simply put, it's getting someone to do something they wouldn't normally do of their own free will. Unfortunately, perpetrators will use any tool and mechanism at their disposal to maintain that control over that victim. So they may threaten to have that person deported, contact law enforcement, into relationship. Whatever it takes to maintain that power and control over that victim, that perpetrator will say and do. And again, these are tools that perpetrators may focus on one, or they may use all three different means at their disposal to exploit an individual, sometimes months, years, and sadly, sometimes even decades. To give us an understanding of what's happening in our society, I briefly want to give us both some global and local statistics. It's estimated, as you can see, around 28 million people worldwide are survivors of this crime, and that roughly about 80% of those that are experiencing human trafficking are actually being exploited by their physical labor, and about 20% are being exploited sexually. Historically, in our society, there's been a focus on sex trafficking, but it's really important to realize that globally, it's actually a crime that's happening more often is labor trafficking. I try not to do this very often, but I am going to give you a Rodger opinion. Based on my experience and being in the field as long as I have, I personally believe that one form of exploitation is not better or worse than the other. That both forms of exploitation have a negative impact on survivors, and luckily both law enforcement and our court system hold perpetrators accountable for this crime. In California, it's estimated that about 1 in 5 survivors are people that are working in the home, such as maids, nannies, caretakers. And then also to disproportionate, like a lot of crimes in our society, survivors oftentimes identify as females. And about a little more than half of those survivors in California are actually born out of the United States. Again, perpetrators find those individuals that are here from other countries, especially those without documents, more easy to manipulate and to maintain that power control and sadly exploit. I just want to stress, and I think that might be a challenge for the work that you do, is that potentially anybody that you come in contact with may either currently be a victim or they may be a survivor of human trafficking. Sometimes when I go out and do trainings out in the community, partners will say, well, oh, this is a crime that only happens in another country, or it only happens in another state, or it only happens to those people. Unfortunately, human trafficking can happen to anyone. With the clients that we've seen over the years, we actually had a gentleman that was 74 years old that was being exploited in construction. We've also worked with a young girl that was 9 years old who's being exploited with her physical labor, and she's also being sexually exploited. And again, that really matches the local and national statistics, is that anybody can be a survivor of human trafficking. So again, I want to thank you all for being here today to learn a little bit more about this subject matter, be able to identify and connect survivors to services that they're entitled to. With labor trafficking, the National Hotline is a great resource. And the hotline is a place where either you or someone you either know or suspect is a survivor of human trafficking and may want to get connected to services. The National Hotline actually takes those calls and they run statistics and numbers to give us as service providers a better idea of the different areas and locations that human trafficking may be experienced in. As you can see in the chart, about 20% of the calls that came into the human traffic line were things that were happening regarding domestic work. Now, this doesn't tell us if this is service providers, is this law enforcement agencies, or who the callers are, but it does give us an idea of where the exploitation may have been taken. With the domestic work, that's work that's done in the household. It's all the things I wish I could afford to have done at my house. Having a nanny for the kids, a personal chef, having someone doing the yard work for me. So any work that's done in the household, that's considered domestic work. Being a native California, I feel so fortunate for all the great produce that I have the opportunity to enjoy, either at a restaurant or at the home. And that great produce, that fresh fruits and vegetables that I have, unfortunately comes at a cost, that there are farmers in our society that unfortunately exploit their workers. And as you can see, about 12% of the calls that came into the national hotline were things that were happening out in the fields. And unfortunately, there are farmers that instead of the end of a pay period, instead of giving their employee a paycheck, they actually tell that employee they owe them money because the employer has been taking them to and from work. Maybe they've been allowing that person to live on a trailer with 10 other individuals. Maybe not with running water, but they still charge them for that living situation. So again, instead of getting a paycheck at the end of the month, like you and I get, a farm worker may actually be more indebted to their farmer than the month before. So what we used to call indentured servitude, something that we thought got rid of decades ago, sadly still happens today. With traveling sales crew, I can give you a specific example that happened here in Sacramento about 10 years ago. There was a young couple that lived back east in Boston, and thanks to the internet and thanks to Craigslist, they saw an opportunity for a job here in Sacramento. That young couple, 18 and 19 years old, picked up the phone and contacted that employer. And the employer said, yes, you'll make tons of money in sales, come out here. And if you don't make lots of money, I promise you I'll actually give you a plane ticket back home to Boston. So you have nothing to lose. That couple, it took them 2 or 3 days to go to friends and family members, but eventually they were able to get enough money to buy 2 one-way tickets here to Sacramento. It was a beautiful August day, and that total stranger picked them up at the airport, drove them to a pretty good part of the city, gave them some supplies and said, see you in 10 hours, you're gonna go door to door selling magazines. So being a beautiful August day here, it was 108, 110 degrees. And after going door to door for 10 hours, that couple was very disappointed that they didn't sell one magazine subscription. But they were very happy that that total stranger was where he said he would be and picked them up. As that couple got into the back of the car and cooled off of the air conditioning, they said, thank you, but no thank you. We want that plane ticket back to Boston. We don't want to do this anymore. Well, that total stranger turned around and said, what are you talking about? Not only did I not promise you a plane ticket back to Boston, but you owe me money. I gave you supplies to sell magazines today, and each of you need to give me $100 each. Otherwise, I'm going to call the police and I'm going to have you arrested. Luckily for that couple, they knew it wasn't right and it wasn't fair. And they actually got connected with one of the agencies that Michelle mentioned earlier. The agency was called My Sister's House, and they stayed with My Sister's House, and that they assisted them for a few days. And eventually that couple was able to get back to their family in Boston. The reason I still share that story, even though it was almost a decade old, is for a couple of reasons. One is that it's a very classic example of that bait and switch that labor trafficking may occur. Again, it's the promise of a job, and then the parameters change, and then there's threats that the employee can't leave. The other reason I like to share that story is for that couple, the exploitation was only a day long. Again, for a lot of survivors and clients that you may come across, they may be exploited over long periods of time, anywhere from months, years, to even decades. But again, even this couple, even though they had one really miserable day, they were able to get back to their families within a short amount of time. Unfortunately, with the restaurants and food industries, one of my first trainings about 7 years ago was down in Vacaville. And I was at a social service program, and one of the attendees said, hey, Rodger, did you hear what happened at the restaurant down the street from us last month? I hadn't heard, and they shared with me that there was a restaurant in Vacaville, and I honestly don't remember the name, but there was an employer that had both a cook and a dishwasher during the day, that in the evenings after the restaurant closed, he forced those two individuals to sleep in the restaurant and act as security guards. Luckily, thanks to a concerned citizen, law enforcement was tipped off, and those two people were removed from that situation, and that restaurant owner was held accountable. And again, I think it's really challenging for us in our societies that I'm sure that there are places that I've gone to and places that you've gone to that people are being exploited. Because when it comes to labor trafficking, we don't see how employers are treating their employees behind closed doors. And again, in restaurants, food service industries, health and beauty industries, unfortunately, employees are being exploited by their employer. What we've seen over the last 8 years here at the IRC with the nearly 600 clients we've worked with is a majority of them, again, have been exploited either working in a household setting and healthcare, being forced to engage in criminal activity, in construction and agriculture. I don't like to spend a lot of time on negative things, but I think it's important that we do take time to think about traffickers. Now, not necessarily what a trafficker looks like, he or she, but thinking about the connection between the trafficker and the person that's being exploited. For just a moment, I'd like you to think, is there a connection between those two individuals? Generally, when I ask people to think about this, they think it's a stranger, that it's a person driving around in an unmarked van around a park, spotting a young person, pulling them in the van, driving away, and starting to exploit them. Now, again, the reason I chuckled under my breath there a little bit is not that it's a funny situation or that that never happens. Luckily, that is very uncommon. What is much more common is that there is a connection between the trafficker and the person being exploited. One of the trends that we've seen increase over the last 8 years working with clients is the use of organized crimes exploiting individuals. For example, a couple of years ago, we had the privilege of working with a young man named George. Obviously, that's not his real name, but that's what I'll call him today. And George grew up in Mexico. And unfortunately, George had the misfortune of coming across a drug cartel. And every day, George was told that he had to go to a warehouse. He was handed a backpack and a slip of paper with an address on it where he was to take that backpack and return to the warehouse within a certain amount of time. And George was told if he didn't do that in a timely manner, by the end of the same day, either he or one of his family members would be killed. For about 3 months, George had to endure the unknown if he and his family members would be alive the following day. Luckily for George, and I honestly don't know how, but he and his family were able to relocate to Northern California. And he was talking about his experience with a service provider. And luckily that service provider had the knowledge to identify what George was talking about was human trafficking, and actually got George connected with our services, and we were able to help him and his family through the healing process. But it's more than just drug cartels, it's even gangs. The initiation period, oftentimes, that gangs force individuals to engage in illegal activities to become a part of a gang. So maybe individuals that maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, law enforcement and maybe even society would see as a criminal, now we see actually as service providers as they too are victims of human trafficking. So the definition of victims has evolved over the years. As I mentioned with employers, it's individuals that own multi-billion-dollar corporations that exploit their workers. It could be mom and pop grocery store owners or even a restaurant. So it's both small and large industries where people are being exploited. But also too, there is this intersection and connection between the survivor oftentimes and the perpetrator. Either one of genetics, that human DNA, or a romantic connection. It could be a boyfriend and girlfriend that are out on the streets. And one person would turn to the other and say, we need money to sleep in a hotel tonight. So I need you to go and sell yourself. Well, that couple, they love each other. So one person chooses to do that. They sleep in the motel, and then a week may pass, and that same individual, instead of asking someone to sell themselves for money, they tell them, if you don't do it, either I'm going to physically beat you up, or they may threaten to end the relationship. So they coerce that person to continue to engage in a sexual activity. Sadly, too, just like with domestic violence, or what we now call intimate partner violence, it can be intergenerational, where you can have a survivor of human trafficking that was exploited as a youth. When they grow up, they have their own children. Unfortunately, sometimes because it's a learned behavior, they choose to repeat that pattern. So it goes from generation to generation to generation. Also in the foster system, where youth are at higher risk, unfortunately, there are either adults or other youth in that person's life that may choose to exploit them. And I think for a lot of survivors of crime and human trafficking in general, there's a lot of shame and guilt to being a survivor of human trafficking. But then when we realize that that survivor also too either has a romantic relationship or is related to the person that has been exploiting them, it's even more challenging for a survivor to disclose to us as service providers their experience. And again, I think that's something that we need to keep in mind when we are screening and trying to identify potential victims of this crime. So what are some things to look for and to listen for? Someone that's acting very fearful or anxious. Now, some of the other topics that we'll be talking about today, a survivor of domestic violence, someone that's experienced being sexually exploited, they may act very fearful and anxious too. Also, too, someone that's not able to act or speak on their own behalf, or someone that's really concerned if they don't get back to their employer right away, that they're constantly looking at their cell phone, and they're concerned if they don't get to work at a certain time, there's going to be some major consequences. In large part, thanks to COVID, we've really focused on work-life balances in our society. And I think all of us in this field still struggle to do that, but especially survivors of human trafficking don't have a work-life balance. So if you have an individual that's talking about working 6, 7 days a week, 10, 12 hours every day, that might be an indicator. Or if they live and work in the same location. And again, it's having that connection and that ability to listen and hearing those inconsistencies in their experiences that will help you to identify potentially if they're a victim of this crime. With the clients that we've had the privilege of working with over the last 8 years, they share with us what they've endured. Again, it's working really long days, 10, 12 hours every day, the living conditions in which they experience. For some survivors, especially those that are from another country, maybe in their home country, the living conditions were that they would actually sleep on a mattress on the ground. But here in the United States, they're sleeping on a mattress in a trailer with 10 other people. So from that survivor's perspective, their living conditions may be a little bit better, but yet the living conditions that employer is forcing them to live in doesn't meet the standards that the state requires them to be a part of and to meet. Also, too, a lot of individuals that are here from other countries, either on a student visa or work visa, those documents are oftentimes taken away from them from their trafficker. Even an individual's driver's license, an individual may say, oh, let me hold on to those documents for you for safekeeping because we don't want anything to happen. So let me hold on to that for you. And again, that's another mechanism and way that people hold on to those documents so that person can't leave that situation. Again, with human trafficking and domestic violence, a lot of times there are a lot of barriers for why survivors may be in these situations for long periods of time. Many years ago, when I worked in the domestic violence field, we would hear individuals say, well, he or she must like being in an abusive relationship because if that happened to me, I would leave. A lot of victim blaming. It's gotten a little bit better in my humble opinion, but when it comes to human trafficking, there still are people in our society who think, well, they must like working there, or why don't they just leave? I think it's really important, again, as service providers, we understand the real and perceived barriers that keep victims in these situations. It's the isolation, the supervision, the unawareness of rights that we have as workers, and sadly, the distrust of law enforcement. As an old white guy, I've had very few but positive interactions with law enforcement. But I realize that's not the case for everyone. And sadly, perpetrators will use that as a tool and mechanism to say, if you ever try to leave, you're going to be forced to work with law enforcement and you're going to get arrested and deported. But also, too, it's simple fear. The fear of threats to harm to themselves, a family member, or the fear of the unknown. And those fears, both real and perceived, are real challenges for a survivor to engage, even with a safe partner like you, to discuss what they've been experiencing. So again, if you do have someone disclose to you, I think it says two important things. One, it says how brave that survivor is to disclose to you. And number two, what a safe environment that you've created to allow that person to discuss their experience with you. If you think you have a client that's a victim of human trafficking, please provide that person a message of hope. Let them know that they have rights and they're not to blame, and that there are programs available to help them. And I would encourage you to really check on that person's short-term and long-term safety. After you end the appointment today, will it be safe for you then? Do you have a safe place tonight? For the next 48 hours, what does your safety look like? And come up with a plan with them if they're willing and able to do that. And then also to know that you don't have to be that expert, that there are resources available. And you can pick up the phone and contact one of the agencies you're seeing today. You can pick up the phone and contact the national hotline number. Whatever feels best and safe for that survivor, that's something that you could do at that time if they're willing to do that. But also too, don't think you have to be super person, that you're there to rescue them. Luckily, there are other agencies and programs that are able to provide that. And also too, it doesn't matter about a person's immigration status. That's the great thing nowadays. Our programs and the other programs that you'll learn about today, a person's immigration status should never be a barrier for them to get connected with the services to increase theirs and their family's safety. And also what you don't want to do is to make a promise you can't keep. Either a promise about services you provide internally or making promises about outside agencies. Because if you do make a promise that's not kept, that will really discourage that survivor and really could put them back in a place where they're not willing to take those next steps. So please never make a promise or expectation for a survivor of programs that you can't actually make sure will actually occur. And then again, connect them with services, either with our agency, the national hotline number, or any of the programs that you're learning about today. But please keep in mind that not all survivors are going to be at a point where they want to take those next steps. And it might be challenging as helpful, supportive people that we are in this field to respect that, but we need to. That all survivors, even though they may have experienced some really horrific situations, they know what's best for them in their life. So not every survivor is going to want to take those next steps. And remember, that's okay. But what you can do is normalize their feelings and let them know that they do have choices and they have time to make decisions that are best for them. And for some survivors, maybe it's next week, maybe it's next month, maybe it's next year before they feel they want to connect with services and programs. And again, we respect that, and we believe that survivors have the capability of making decisions that are best for them and their family on their timeline, not ours and not yours as a service provider. Real quickly, I'd like to dispel some myths. And one of the myths that I hear is that human trafficking and smuggling is the same crime. That's not the case. Human trafficking may include smuggling, but smuggling is crossing a nation's or state borders without proper documentation. You could have someone that was born and raised here in Sacramento County, never left the county. As long as they experience that AMP model that I talked about earlier, they meet the definition, they're a survivor of human trafficking. Hopefully I've already done this a couple times, but one more time, I just want to stress to you all that not all survivors of human trafficking are going to be physically abused. Also, too, sometimes service providers think that you're going to have individuals that are going to self-identify. More than likely, that's not the case. In my nearly 30 years in this field, I have yet to hear of one individual that their client that they were working with, their first words out of their mouth was, "Help me, I'm a victim of human trafficking." What you're much more likely to hear is, "My boss is a jerk and they're forcing me to do work that I'm not being paid for." Or, "My boyfriend is forcing me to have sex with strangers and I don't want to do that anymore, but I don't have any options." That is going to be the information that you will hear. And then hopefully in return, you can acknowledge that person's experience. You can educate that person about that being a crime. And then hopefully too, you can connect that person to resources. Another myth that I hear is that human trafficking only happens in underground industries, like the selling of drugs or firearms. Again, sadly, in any society, anytime where there's a chance for profit, there's an opportunity for exploitation. Another myth is that people kind of get themselves in these situations and they get what they deserve. Well, luckily, both state and federal law disagrees with that. And again, all of us, when it comes to employment, we have the right to have safe working conditions. And most importantly, we have the right to terminate that employment and not have any consequences to that decision. And then lastly, there is this myth that human trafficking only occurs to individuals that are here from other countries without documentation. Yes, disproportionately people from foreign countries and those that aren't here with documents are more likely to be survivors of human trafficking. But again, anybody could be a survivor of human trafficking, both foreign-born, someone born here in the United States. As promised, I'm going to end on some positive news about some hope, and hope about services that are available to survivors of human trafficking. With our program over the last 8 years, with the clients that we work with, we focus on 3 major tasks. One task for most of our clients is helping them with their immigration and legal challenges, their physical well-being, and then lastly, their mental well-being. And we do this in 31 counties. 8 years ago, when we started our program, we had one individual working all the way from Contra Costa County up to the Oregon border. And luckily, our program has grown over the years, but we still provide services in 31 counties. If you do come across someone that either lives and works in one of these counties or is relocating here, we can provide services. If, though, you come across someone that maybe lives in another part of the state or another part of the nation, even though we don't provide services there, we can definitely have a conversation with you and that potential survivor, and then do that warm handoff for that person when they get to that new location. For example, we had a client that was here in Northern California that relocated to Wichita, Kansas. And we had a program in Wichita, Kansas, where we connected them to our services. So it made it much more easier for that survivor to get the services they needed in another state, something that would have been very difficult if they didn't have that connection. With our program, we provide total and complete case management. Once we get connected with a client, we do a risk assessment, a safety assessment, and then we help developing 3 goals with that survivor. Just as folks on this training today are really diverse and have unique backgrounds and needs, so is true survivors of human trafficking. Each survivor has different goals and objectives that they want to achieve. And so we don't simply tell a survivor, oh, you have to do this or you've got to do that. We provide options and choices. Again, we believe in the empowerment model that survivors have the capability to make decisions that are best for them and their family. And with a little support and encouragement and ability to navigate different systems, we see survivors flourish every day. For some survivors, it's getting a restraining order. For some survivors, it's maybe relocating to another state. Again, people's needs are different, people's choices are different, and goals change. Maybe at the beginning when we're working with a client, it's one goal, and then after a couple months working with them, the goals change, and that's okay. We are federally funded through the Department of Homeland Security and Victims of Crime, and those funds allow us to work with clients up to 2 years. The average length of time that we work with our clients, though, 11 months. Now, I think that says a lot about our case managers, how awesome they are, but also, too, I think it shows how resilient survivors of human trafficking can be, again, when given some support. We don't have a housing program or a shelter, but because we have been helping refugees relocate to this region since 1986, we have really good working connections with our housing providers, and we have a rapid rehousing program too for the clients that we work with. Thanks to our donors, we have a very limited food and clothing closet, but we also too help clients get connected to those programs that they're entitled to provide food and clothing to their families. And then we want to set our clients up for success. So it could be helping them with their language skills, getting them ready for a job. For one client not too long ago is driving them to a local community college and helping them register for their nursing classes. For another client we worked with, that 74-year-old man that was exploited in construction, he didn't have any human babies, but he had 4 fur babies, and one of them had a tumor the size of an orange. And our case manager was actually able to find a veterinarian that removed that tumor, improved that dog's life, and then indirectly improved our client's life. Again, I'm not saying our program here at the IRC is perfect, but that is the level of standard of care that we try to provide to our clients, and we really want to empower them and to have them be successful once we discontinue our working relationship with them. For survivors that are here without documentation, there are 2 different ways that they can start the process to become a U.S. citizen. And one of them is called the T visa, which is available to all survivors of human trafficking. Another option is something called the U visa, which is someone that's experienced a crime here in the United States. And there's some other visa opportunities that people have. And it's more than simply giving a person a piece of paper and saying, good luck to you. What we do is we help them get connected with an immigration attorney, help them fill out the documents, help them through the process so that they're successful. And it's really important that people know the options, because not all survivors of human trafficking, A, want to be a US citizen, and two, not all survivors of human trafficking are going to be willing to go through the process of going through the criminal justice system and being in court for anywhere from easily 3 to 5 years. But again, we believe that survivors should have that option and choice. And if they do decide to do that, we want them to have the tools to be successful. In addition, all individuals that are here in the Golden State, doesn't matter if they're foreign born or born here in the United States or out of the United States, they're entitled to assistance to help them with their housing, to help them with their medical needs, which is really important because many of our clients haven't seen a doctor or a dentist in decades. And then lastly, their nourishment. We're able to get them connected with programs to help them get food for themselves and their family. Who and how is this done? I'm happy you asked. Our team, especially right now, is small but mighty. Nikita is our current manager that is overseeing the program. She has been a part of our team for a couple of years, and her history before coming to the HOPE program, she actually worked at Empower Placer, so she has a background of working in domestic violence and sexual assault herself. You see my mugshot there that gets to do the outreach and training components. We used to have a position where someone was kind of helping navigate the donations and getting donations to our clients. And then lastly, Caitlin, one of our current case managers, she was my intern for 6 months before coming an employee, an outstanding person that's been with our program for about 3 years now. And then, not that I'm going to poach for anybody out there, but we are hiring for some positions. So maybe take a look later on after the training at our website to see if maybe you'd like to become a part of the team. In serious note, though, we are here to support you and your clients. And if you have a question that you're working with the individual and you're not quite sure, your spidey senses tingling, but you're not sure what to say or to do, please feel free to pick us up at the phone and give us a call. Now, unlike our colleagues at Weave, who operate a really cool 24-hour support line, we are here during regular business hours. We actually get to sleep. Our business line is available from 9 to 5 o'clock, but you also can send us an email. In addition to, I do want to give the national hotline number, which is a great resource. I've called and texted several times myself, and that's another resource that's available. Now, please keep in mind the national hotline doesn't actually provide services, but they're a clearinghouse. So again, if you're not sure of what resources are appropriate to give, that is a great number that I would encourage you to either call yourself or to text, or to provide someone that you think may benefit from that number. And then lastly, as I always do, I'm going to give a blatant plug for my part of the program. I love the opportunity of providing trainings. And again, I can't thank you all enough for allowing me to be here with my very esteemed colleagues today. But if you are part of a department that would like a deeper training, or maybe you're part of a faith community or going to school and you'd like a free training, I could talk about this subject matter from as short as an hour and as long as a half-a-day training for you. And if that's something that you think your agency could benefit from, I would love the opportunity to provide either remote training like this one, or even better, in-person training. I would love the opportunity to do that. Also, too, maybe you didn't have an opportunity to ask a question or felt comfortable asking a question today. I've been very fortunate in my 30 years of being in the field that people have been very kind to me, and I love the opportunity to pay it forward. So if there's anything that I can do in the work that you do with your clients on a daily basis, if you have questions about services or anything that I can do to support the work that you do, I would feel very honored that you reached out to me, and I've tried to provide the best information and resources I knew that would be available to you and your clients. So please feel free to follow up with me later today, next month, next year. Anytime that I can support the work that you do, I am here to do that, and I feel that it's a privilege and honor to do that. And then I just want to make this as easy as possible. I know this will be sent out to folks, but I do want to pause here. And if you want to take your fancy smartphone and to request a training, to make a donation, to help us do the work that we do, to become a potential volunteer, or maybe you have a family member that wants to get involved, maybe you have some volunteer hours that they'd like to make a major difference in their community, we have opportunities to do that. And then lastly, the client referral form, it's a very easy lift. It's simply filling out a form that's one Google Doc, getting that information to us, and then our caseworkers within 24 hours would follow up with that individual that you'd like us to have contact with their permission. So we got the fancy QR codes there for you too. And again, this will be included in the slide deck that will be provided to you down the road. Again, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I know it's a lot of information right out of the gate, but I think it's important that we have a better understanding of what human trafficking is, how to identify it, and to know that there are support systems in place, both for survivors of human trafficking and for you as professionals that work with clients on a daily basis. And again, thank you all for being here today, and I look forward to hearing, along with you, the presenters that will have some great information to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rodger. You're seeing, hopefully you're seeing all the love celebrations, and congrats on screen here. We are actually transitioning into a few minutes break. I know we're here for a time this morning, and so if you are needing to step away, grab a water, grab a snack, take a bathroom break, please feel free to do so. We will be back at 10:47. In the meantime, if you are sticking around, Rodger is available, is on the line till the end of this call, and so feel free to drop your questions in chat, and he'll be able to address those directly. And then Rodger, feel free, you're more than welcome to keep responding to the relevant questions throughout the presentations.
All right, thank you, Nika. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope y'all had a good break. You're able to stretch a little bit, get some water. I know, grab myself some tea here to help with the caffeine in the morning. Real quick about myself, my name is Leander. My pronouns are he, him. I'm not nearly as decorated as Rodger, working 30 years in the field. Amazing. But I have been at Weave for almost 5 years now. I initially started as a youth advocate and community educator, and have since moved into my current role of being the training coordinator here in Weave in Sacramento. For those who may not have heard or are not familiar with Weave, we are Sacramento County's local and only rape crisis center. Every county has a rape crisis center that is funded by the state. Weave has that wonderful privilege to work with sexual assault victims. We are able to respond to SARTs, work with survivors of domestic violence and sex trafficking, which is the focus of my training here. As you can see on the screen, we support folks of all relationships, all genders, all ages, all people, all the time. And our vision is when everyone acts, violence ends. We really want to emphasize that everyone has a role in ending violence in our communities, and all of you who are here present in this training right now, you are doing your roles as well in your individual, of course, positions, and just by learning more and, gaining more education around these really important topics. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, I got ahead of myself just a little bit here. I do apologize. So as I mentioned, our vision is when everyone acts, violence ends. And of course, our mission is to promote safe and healthy relationships and to support survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and sex trafficking. All right, next slide. Quick goals for today's training. This may seem a little redundant because I know Rodger had already touched on a lot of these, but our hope is that folks here feel more confident coming out of this training, more comfortable, that they have more tools under their belt to be able to, first of all, recognize the red flags of sex trafficking, respond with empathy. We're going to go over resources and how to support survivors and how to respond more towards the end. And then, of course, refer for help and all the resources that we're sharing with you. There may be some overlap that you'll see between all the resources you'll see today, but that just means that they are good resources to have, right? Next slide, please. I don't have to tell you, but I will just provide another reminder that when we are talking about human trafficking, specifically, we're going to be discussing focuses on sex trafficking. That is a really difficult topic, right? We're going to talk about CSEC, which stands for the commercial sexual exploitation of children. And these conversations can be activating. It can be really difficult to be talking about. So please make sure that you are practicing self-care. I don't see any of you folks here, but do what you need to do. If you need to grab some water or take a few deep breaths or step away from your computer a little bit, please know that we encourage that. We want to make sure folks are taking care of themselves, and this information can be really hard to hear, right? So I just want to provide that quick content warning before we get into the topics that we'll be talking about today. Right. So some impacts and statistics for y'all real quick. 15.4 million children are exposed to domestic violence. This is a national statistic here in the United States. 43% of sexual assault survivors are under the age of 18. 1 out of 3 teens experience abuse in a relationship, and 1 in 10 teens experience physical abuse from a partner, right? These may just appear as numbers on a screen, but when we put it into context of actual people, we often say that regardless of if we're talking about it or not talking about it, these things are happening, right? And we do find that especially sex trafficking is a vastly underreported or unreported statistic, crime that we don't often, get to learn more about. So the importance of being able to have this space to spread that education is so important, because again, we want to make sure folks are able to identify the red flags and know what the support and processes will look like after that, right? We'll go on to the next slide, please. So human trafficking is the second largest international crime industry and the fastest growing international crime industry. I believe when I first started working in this role, it was the third largest international crime industry. So we really see that it has, bumped its way up to second, essentially, right? And there are a lot of reasons why that is, and we'll discuss them a little bit. But one thing that I always note, and it's always difficult for me to say this, is that traffickers see human beings as a reusable commodity, right? If, let's say, somebody is selling drugs, right? You sell drugs once, they are used, and then they're gone, right? Unfortunately, when we're talking about traffickers, I share Rodger's sentiments earlier about all the horrible words that come to mind when talking about traffickers. And it's also important to note that they are smart, right? They know how to get away with what they are doing. I hate saying that, but it's important to acknowledge that so that we don't underestimate traffickers, right? Because obviously, if they were easy to be captured, it wouldn't be one of the largest international crime industries and the fastest growing, right? So there's a lot of reasons why that is. One of them is that traffickers see humans as a reusable commodity. We're seeing a rise in trafficking rates because of introduction of street gangs into the trafficking trade. And a lot of other reasons that we will be discussing further in this training. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So again, according to the International Labor Organization, there are an estimated 49.6 million victims of trafficking. This is, again, I believe in 2016 was the last time they had posted this statistic, and it was around 40 million. So we again see that it really has risen quite a lot. This is a staggeringly high number, and not to mention, again, it is an underreported number, right? So we really see the impacts on how many folks can be victimized by this terrible crime, right? We'll go to the next slide, please. So a lot of folks may have heard that California is a hotspot for trafficking activity, right? Some of you may have even heard that Sacramento is a hotspot for trafficking activity. You are all absolutely right. If you have heard that, or if you know of that, that is a fact. And there are a lot of reasons for that. As we see here in the heat data, this is from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, a heat map of their call data. A few things to note here is that this map is a representation of reported trafficking activity in these specific areas that you see, right? So this map specifically represents data in areas where folks have the resources, have the understanding, are able to recognize trafficking and how to report it, right? So if you look at the map here, we see Wyoming and Nebraska. I'm not saying that, trafficking doesn't happen in these states, right? There are a variety of reasons why we may not be seeing those hotspots popping up in those specific maps. But we do see very concentrated heat maps going on, a lot going on here in California, right? And then a lot going on over there on the East Coast. We really see those hotspots are really dark red in those areas, right? And there are a variety of reasons why that is. If we look at California here, there's actually a well-known trafficking ring that happens from here in like Sacramento County, San Francisco area, the Bay Area, going down to LA, San Diego, over to Las Vegas. If we see that at the bottom of Nevada over there, there's that really dark spot. That's where Vegas is. There's a well-known trafficking, I suppose, triangle trafficking ring that we're aware of that happens in these areas. And again, there's a variety of reasons why that is. One, of course, is the dense population, right? The very, very dense population of these big cities with a lot of folks, a lot of things going on. And there's also the freeway, right? Going up and down the 5, it's very easy to transport folks up and down the 5 here. It's close to the docks, right? It's very easy to transport folks in and out. It's easy to get away with it, right? Not to mention a lot of events, with that dense population, is that there are a lot of sporting events, business events, folks coming in and out of the country and from other states, right? There's a lot of different reasons why we really see the concentration being very dense in these areas. Similarly to the East Coast over there, right? All the reasons that I mentioned there. So in California specifically, it's actually home to, I want to say 3 because I'm mentioning the top 10 here. But also important to note that, again, Sacramento is 100% a hotspot. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. So California is home to 3 of the nation's highest child trafficking areas. Number 1 is Los Angeles, number 7, San Francisco, number 8 is San Diego. I believe, if I remember correctly, Sacramento may have been 12 or 13 or something like that. So it's definitely up there, right? But we see that, again, this is limited in what it tells us, because when you're looking for something, typically you're going to find it, right? So these are places where folks are looking for trafficking. Folks may be more aware of the trafficking that happens in these areas, in these highly populated areas. So that's really important to keep in mind in terms of what our response looks like and education around the topics. Because if we're not aware that something's happening, again, we had Wyoming and Nebraska over there. If folks are not talking about it, if there's not education happening around sex trafficking, then people are not looking for it, right? So these numbers, these statistics can really be limited in what it tells us. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about smuggling versus trafficking, there is a distinct difference between the two. And the main thing that I think I'd like to point out is the consent piece, right? So when somebody is being smuggled, right? Oh, we'll go on to the next slide, please. When somebody is being smuggled, that means that they are consenting to be moved, right, across international borders, moved illegally across international borders. Whereas in trafficking, it can happen within a nation, within a state, within a community, even within a family, right? That movement is not necessary for it to be considered human trafficking, right? So somebody can literally never have to leave Sacramento County and they can be considered a trafficking victim, right? And the missing piece is that there is no consent, right? Somebody is not consenting to be moved, to be trafficked, and then so that movement isn't necessary for it to be considered human trafficking. Okay. And we'll go on to the next question, please. So with labor trafficking, I'm not going to go into a deep dive on this one because Rodger has already beautifully explained this. But with labor trafficking, that can look like that force, fraud, and coercion piece that he was talking about earlier, where it can include the physical and sexual abuse or confinement. The fraud can look like false promises or withholding wages. And then coercion, as he said, can typically be the most commonly used tactic that traffickers use, is the threats of harm, debt bondage, psychological manipulation, and the abuse of the legal system. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, please. So in commercial sex, we often think that there's two legs of human trafficking, right? So Rodger was talking a lot about the labor services. We're going to talk a lot more about that commercial sex. And in commercial sex, typically as those three elements that we were talking about earlier, they have to be present for it to be considered human trafficking. And those elements are force, fraud, and coercion. And it's important to think that it's important to remember that when we're talking about commercial sex, we usually will default into thinking that it's just sex in exchange of money, right? When in fact, it's really important to remember that it is sex acts in exchange for anything of value, and value can be subjective, right? Um, Depending on the individual, the client that you're working with, the survivor, something of value can vary greatly. Yes, absolutely. It can be money, right? But it can also be a roof over their heads, shelter, housing, right? It can be food, it can be nourishment, water, right? It can be medicine, medication, basic needs for maybe they have a disability, right? And it can also be love, acceptance, a relationship, a place of belonging, right? So I mentioned earlier that traffickers are smart, right? And what I mean by that is they know how to exploit a victim, right? They know what they're able to, in the grooming process, they're able to identify what a person or a child um, is looking for, what they value, and they fill that, and then in turn exploit them using that as a vulnerability, right? And we'll go on to the next slide, please. Oops, I got ahead of myself here. So as I mentioned earlier, force, fraud, and coercion are the components that need to be present in order for it to be considered trafficking. And I mentioned earlier that in labor trafficking, it does look a little different, but there are a lot of similarities in that, right? So of course, we think of the kidnapping that happens, right? When we think of someone being trafficked, we may default to somebody being kidnapped, put into a van, and then forced into sex trafficking, right? Absolutely, that does happen. 100% it does. And it's not the most common way that traffickers um, use as a tactic for their victims. So that includes the violence, the threats, kidnapping. Drugs are commonly used, specifically opioids are commonly used to control their victims of trafficking. And then, of course, blackmail. It's a type of force that they use as well. With fraud, they use opportunities, money, experiences. So that can look like somebody saying like, oh, you can be a model, right? Let me photograph you, right? Let me introduce you to somebody who I think you have great potential, and then it leads to one thing to another, and then the promises of money, promises of experience, right? I've supported a student before. She's an 8th grader where, we were doing a check-in, and she had shared that an older boyfriend was offering her $5,000 to what she shared with me was that she just wanted to he just wanted to help her and her mom with rent, right? those red flags started coming up, right? Older boyfriend offering $5,000 with no strings attached. That's what she told me, that no strings were attached there. So we had to have that conversation around, okay, like what does this look like? What are the warning signs? You know, making sure that she knew that she can talk to a trusted adult. But that red flag just really came up because again, $5,000 is a lot of money in that situation, right? And that is a common tactic that traffickers use. That's a lot of money, right? And then, of course, coercion. Coercion is a very, very powerful tool that we may sometimes overlook. But the use of relationships, charms, the promise of gifts and flattery and romance and love. We're going to talk about it in a few slides, but there are a lot of vulnerabilities. You know, there's no specific victim profile when it comes to trafficking, but there are certain vulnerabilities that can increase that risk of being trafficked, right? Specifically, we see the age range of around like preteens and high schoolers, where they are very vulnerable. And a big part of that is because they're looking for a place to belong. They're looking for love, right? Peers and relationships become increasingly important in that age, right? So coercion is a very powerful tactic that traffickers will use when choosing their victims and grooming their victims, right? We'll go into the next slide here, please. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, here on the left bubble that we see is it's really small. So let me read that out. The commercial sexual exploitation of children, also known as CSEC, is a form of human trafficking that does not require the elements of force, fraud, and coercion, right? The reason being is that minors cannot legally consent, right? If you are under, here in the state of California, if you are under the age of 18, you cannot legally give consent, right? So we'll go to the next slide, please. So anyone under the age of 18 engaged in commercial sex is considered a victim of trafficking. Now, this is really important because the language that we use around this can really have a huge impact on the survivor, right? So go to the next slide, please. So to make it clear that there is no such thing as a child or teen prostitute, right? Oftentimes we have heard in the past that, okay, well, if they're choosing to live this life, so to speak, right? So obviously they want to be a sex worker, right? But again, there is no such thing as a teen or a child prostitute because if they're under the age of 18, they legally cannot give their consent, right? So there's actually a legislation that had passed. It's Senate Bill 1322, I believe it is, that it's called There's No Such Thing as a Child Prostitute. It essentially ended the practice of treating child victims of sex trafficking as criminals, specifically by prohibiting law enforcement from arresting or charging minors for prostitution or loitering with intent to commit prostitution. So it requires peace officers who encounter children involved in commercial sex acts to report suspected abuse or neglect to county child welfare agencies. There was pushback, there was controversy around this legislation when it passed because some folks would argue that, well, if we are arresting them, then we are essentially saving them from their traffickers. We're getting them away from their traffickers, right? But, when we really think about it, what kind of life are we then putting them into? We are criminalizing these children, these teens, right? We are arresting them for prostitution, when in fact we should be treating them as victims of sex trafficking. We should be providing support and resources instead of, again, criminalizing them essentially, right? Because that puts them on a path that is set up for failure, unfortunately, right? So this is a really important thing to note, especially as service providers, is that we remember that there is no such thing as a child or teen prostitute, right? And the language that we use, I'm not sure if this slide is, can you go to the next slide real quick? Okay, wonderful. It is in this training. So the language that we use is also really important, right? So back then, we used to go into these these meetings with these kiddos and the youth and the teens and say like, hi, I'm blah blah, I'm a CSEC advocate, right? And then oftentimes we would then receive back like, well, I'm not CSEC, right? Like, what do you mean? I don't need this then. Like, I'm not going to talk to you because I'm not CSEC, right? So the importance of language that we use, we've since shifted to just calling them advocates, right? They're just advocates. It can reframe that issue as a form of child abuse and emphasize the need for, again, support rather than punish and or criminalization. So first of all, approaching it in a way where it's like, hey, I'm here to help you. It sounds like this is happening, right? Instead of them feeling like they're in trouble for something, right? And they may prefer to self-identify as one or the other, right? Or another term of their choosing. Some of them may not want to be considered CSEC or even a victim of trafficking, right? I've heard of a variety of different terms before. Some folks are okay with being called a survivor. Some folks are okay with being called a victim of sex trafficking. I've had some folks who said that they wanted to be called a warrior, right? So it varies per individual client survivor that you're working with, depending on their healing process, and meeting them where they're at, is really crucial in that position, and their language should be honored in that position, right? We'll go to the next slide, please. So this is a bit of a jarring statistic here, and I believe following this we have a video that I'm also going to provide a quick content warning around. But 11 to 14 is the average age that children are first commercially sexually exploited in California, right? This is it breaks my heart every single time I read this, because this is staggeringly young. It's 11 to 13 for boys, 12 to 14 for girls. There are a variety of reasons why that is. Among them are in this age, they're going through puberty, right? I mentioned earlier that during this stage in their life, the opinions of peers are increasing, right? Relationships are increasing. So their desire to find love and a place for belonging is going up, right? So that may increase their vulnerability. At this age too, the independence from guardians or parents or caregivers are increasing, right? We all remember what it was like to be that age. We start to feel like, we're invincible and we know everything. And, we start to kind of go off on our own. We may not talk to our parents as much or our guardians as much, right? Which, again, as we can imagine, increases that vulnerability. And especially in this day and age, these 11 to 14-year-olds, they all have phones, right? They all have iPhones. They're on social media, Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, right? Like all these different social media apps where, again, there is very little regulation as to who they're talking to, right? Who's on the other end of that line on that social media account that they've been instant messaging or DMing, right? Um, and it's really, really scary. We're not going to get into the online safety aspect of it all, but y'all can imagine how vulnerable these kiddos are, because I mean, the internet is, a very fickle thing. It's hardly suitable for adults, and it's definitely not suitable for kiddos, right? So traffickers, again, see that as a vulnerability and exploit that, right? So that increases their risk. So there's just a large variety of reasons that this age range is the average age that children are first commercially sexually exploited in California. Yeah, this is a really hard statistic. So before we get into this next slide, which is a video, I invite folks to join me in a quick breath in and out. And we'll do one more, in and out. Okay. We'll reground ourselves for just a moment here. I do want to provide a content warning that this next video is emotionally heavy. There is elements of child abandonment, suicidal ideation, drug use, sexual assault. There's a derogatory language used. After the video, I typically like to give folks a chance to share their emotions, but unfortunately in this webinar format, we won't be able to do that. So please feel free to use the chat feature if you'd like to after reading this, and I'll just share a few things to note after, sorry, not reading this, after watching this video. Okay, so let's go ahead and play, please.
Are you able to hear the audio?
No audio.
Okay, one moment.
Okay. Thank you, Nika.
Is this who you are, son? Huh? Is this who you are, son? Wait.
Faggot! Answer me! Who are you? You are not this!
Upside down.
This is not you!
The waves of love.
You're our son!
Just
How can you do this to your mother and I?
down.
Disgusted with you.
Washed in its wake. I'm lost on wishes. Swim on down into the deep. Crash and burn in the depths of despair. Your hope for me flushed down the drain. Where am I? Upside down. The waves of life just crash me
Vamos,
down.
Corre!
Tumbling round, inside out. What the hell for? Why would life play this hand? Could you just care? Why don't you care? You'll push out the air, leave me nowhere. There's no road left to live, yet to die. Where am I? Upside down. Ooh, all this time I'm just tumbling round. Upside down. Come on, don't give up drown me now and spare me the pain. I'll jump on down, gone from this place, tumbling round, upside down. I am on my
Hey, kid!
way, awake again, the right side up.
All right. Everyone join me again, please, in one more collective breath. And out. Few things that I'd like to address following watching that video. I know it can be really difficult to watch that. It's always emotionally heavy. A few things I want to point out is that as service providers, right, we really should not jump to judgment, and we must treat victims with compassion and understanding, because we see that, okay, this kid was smoking a pipe in the park, right? While our initial thought might be, okay, here's this delinquent, they're smoking drugs in the park, they clearly, like, they're lazy, they don't want to work, they don't care, right? Like that might be the initial thoughts that come to our heads. But we have to think about, like, all right, how did you get here? What happened to you to get to this point? There's a lot of reasons why this kiddo could be smoking that pipe in the park, right? They got kicked out of their house, right? They could be trying to stay warm at night, right? They're trying to cope, disassociate with all the trauma that they're experiencing. And why did they get kicked out, right? Because of who they are, right? Because of them being LGBTQ plus, and their parents not accepting that and kicking them out of the house, right? So because of the circumstances surrounding it, which was not their fault at all, they are having to rely on drugs, sell their body, right? Like, they are, again, vulnerable, right? And traffickers see that. So all youth, as we see here on the screen, all youth can be vulnerable and potentially at risk for exploitation, but there are vulnerabilities that can increase that risk of exploitation. And I'll just read them off here on the screen. I believe I only have 4 minutes left, so forgive me if I go a little fast here. But when it comes to vulnerabilities that they experience, folks who have experienced prior abuse or neglect, involvement with the child welfare, juvenile justice systems, LGBTQ plus youth, feelings of rejection or marginalization, poverty and or homelessness, youth with disabilities, unaccompanied or runaway youth, substance use and abuse, and mental health disorders can potentially increase risk for exploitation. Right, go next slide, please. So I mentioned opioids a little bit earlier already, but it is just a tool that traffickers use for addiction and for control in terms of trafficking. We'll go next slide, please. A few traumas. Yeah, next slide, please. So a lot of this can overlap, a lot of intersectionality with domestic violence, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. Some things that I think are unique to trafficking victims are, of course, STIs, STDs, branding, scarring, and disfigurement is a very big telltale sign for survivors, for victims of trafficking. It can be unwanted pregnancy or forced abortion, forced birth. And then, of course, PTSD. You can imagine the psychological impacts that experiencing that level of chronic sexual trauma on a day-to-day basis that somebody can experience, right? So depression, anxiety, paranoia, helplessness, disassociation, suicidal ideation, any PTSD symptoms, trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is important to note here, because what that looks like is they may feel the need to protect their trafficker because they have trauma bonded. There's a variety of ways that can look like, but it can look like, well, you know what? them minimizing their experiencing by saying, well, it could be worse, right? I used to be homeless and I used to live on the street and didn't know, when my next meal was coming. But hey, now at least I'm getting fed and I have a roof over my head, right? So why would I report or turn in or testify against my trafficker because they have improved, in quotation marks, improved my way of life, right? So there's that trauma bonding impact that happens there, right? Go to the next slide, please. Again, just a lot of intersectionality between the sexual assault, domestic violence, and child abuse, which leads to CSEC. Next slide, please. Red flags that can come up. These are ways I think it's important that we know the red flags just so we're able to identify them when we are working with our clients. So any signs of physical or sexual abuse, I mentioned the suspicious tattoos or branding. Having multiple cell phones can be a red flag, right? Referring to a much older boyfriend, girlfriend, or a partner. Having their monitored movement or communication if you're working with like a client and their guardian or their parent or their partner is not letting them kind of be by themselves, that can be a bit of a red flag. Sexualized behavior, over sexualized behavior, or inappropriate behavior that can be not lining up with their age, such as how they're dressing or how they're acting. And then, of course, substance abuse or signs of addiction when they're used as a tool for power and control. Next slide, please. This has been shared. I'm not going to go over this again, but you will all get these slides. So just a list of wonderful resources to have. Not to mention, of course, you have Weave, IRC, and Joyce here as well as wonderful resources. And of course, our wonderful host, SAC Steps Forward, for even putting together this wonderful webinar series with all of us. Is there a last slide? I think my contact information might be. We'll go ahead and skip this one. Folks will get that resource. Folks will get this resource as well. Really quick, for specific to those in Sacramento County, there are some Weave resources here. The things that I'd like to note is, I think Michelle already mentioned that the housing that we operate, we have 121 beds for emergency and transitional housing. Please use that number that you see there at the top, that 24/7 support line and chat feature will be our gateway into any of our Weave services. And that is their initial, intake session into getting into our safe housing or counseling or anything like that. Weave does have a contract with the county to serve commercially sexually exploited children, and we have funding to work in youth detention facilities. So we have a lot of opportunities to work with the youth in our communities. So if folks have any other questions, last slide I think has my contact information. There you are. There's my email address. So thank you, everyone. And if folks have any other questions or want to get in contact with me, please feel free to reach out.
Leander, thank you so much for all of the detailed information on the statistics, giving us that background, and of course, really elevating the growing challenge, not just here in California and Sacramento, but internationally as well. Again, we are going into another break here before we transition over to Joyce Bilyeau with Family Justice Center. We are going to come back at around 12:34, 12:35. And so please, I know we're going through a lot of heavy but important content today. And so please take the time to step away, take a breath, stretch. We're almost complete. We have a final presentation. And you're gonna head over to lunch pretty soon. Nice. I'm gonna hand it over to you whenever you're ready.
I'm ready. You want to make my screen, my PowerPoint bigger? Welcome back, everybody. Are we ready to go?
Yes, we are.
Great. It's nice to see so many people on. I like all the thumbs up and the hearts. I'm Joyce Liu, and I'm the Deputy Director at the Sacramento Regional Family Justice Center here in Sacramento. Next slide, please. And today I'm going to talk to you about the Family Justice Center services. That's our building. We're in the same building as the child support. If you're familiar with Sacramento, we're off of 3701 Power Inn Road. We're on the third floor of that beautiful building there. We're going to look at some tools to assess for high-risk domestic violence, in particular the Danger Assessment 20, safety planning, strangulation, prevention, and resources. We're going to talk a little bit about the linkage between domestic violence and human trafficking, privacy / confidentiality. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of information on breaking your lease if you are escaping domestic violence, and then what you can look forward to if you're going to continue working in this field. I have worked in this field for 35 years, maybe a little bit longer. Strictly domestic violence and sexual assault, human trafficking, elder and child abuse. I'm also a survivor of domestic violence. So it's just been a lifelong calling for me. Next slide. So the Sacramento Regional Family Justice Center has been identified. We're part of the Family Justice Center Alliance, which has been recognized as the best practice model by the U.S. Department of Justice. So the Sacramento Family Justice Center, we bring together a lot of partner agencies under one space. So when a survivor walks through the door, they minimize the number of times that they share their story and limit the number of times they have to access services. If they're not an on-site partner, they're an off-site partner of ours, like Weave or International Rescue or other resources. So we want to connect our individuals there. Again, we're located at 3701 Power Inn Road. We're on the third floor. Our services are free, and we're open Monday through Friday from 8 to 5:30. Just a little bit of data. So we opened our doors to see clients in July of 2016. We've seen 13,246 new clients. We've had over 16,000 returning visits and almost 30,000 total visits from survivors. This is just for the Family Justice Center. It doesn't include the visits that we get from our on-site partners like Sacramento PD or Sac Sheriff or the Safe Center, Adult Protective Services, or United and Guided. Those are some other community-based organizations that we have on site. In January of 2003, we started keeping data on homelessness as a result of domestic violence, and 20% of our clients have reported being homeless as a result of DV. And then in June of 2022, so for the past couple years, we've been keeping data on how many reported that there was a weapon involved, in particular a gun, and that was 31%. The children that it's impacted via our clients has been over 14,000, almost 15,000 under the age of 18, and out of that 6,149 were under the age of 5 who have been impacted. Next slide. So these are some of the services that we offer here. We offer, as far as direct services goes, case management, crisis intervention. We assist with California victims' compensation applications, the Safe at Home, other words, the address confidentiality program. We advocate, we do safety planning and danger assessments, counseling and therapy. We do support groups, follow-up services, legal services. We have a team of we have a legal team of 5. We're the lead agency in Sacramento that does all of the domestic violence restraining orders and elder abuse orders. In fact, when the survivor comes in and they get connected with our legal team, our team will do the whole order for them based on their story. We'll file it for them. We'll pick it up for them. We'll review it with them, and we'll even serve it for them. Depending on the situation. There's some situations where it's just too lethal that we don't want our process server out there. We also do expert witness testimony in the courts. So as our programs goes, we don't have a shelter, but we offer housing for domestic violence. So for example, if a survivor of domestic violence has left and they're moving into a new place and they need some financial assistance, like for rent or a deposit or a moving van, those kinds of things will help them. And then we'll also provide case management with that. We do have a human trafficking program. So we have human trafficking advocates who are working with survivors out there. We also do, we work with the FBI, Sac Sheriff, Sac PD, and the DA's office, and one of our community partners called Cash. We are out there on the streets with some of the women during the raids, giving them, during the law enforcement stings, giving the women clothing. You know, it's kind of embarrassing, I would imagine, to be standing in front of an officer with hardly no clothes on. So we'll give them slacks, leggings and t-shirts. Inside our t-shirts, we have woven a number in there. It says, I think it says Hope Boutique or something like that. Then it has our 24-hour hotline number on it. We have 2 gang violence prevention programs in North Sacramento and El Paso Heights, where we have staff out there who are really doing the boots on the ground work, working with youth, trying to prevent them from being involved in gangs and using weapons, that kind of thing. We also provide child therapy. So we have child therapists on staff who do free therapy for children. A wonderful program. All the programs are wonderful, are, pretty partial when it comes to kids. So we offer free therapy and group therapy with them. We have our Catch program. This is Children and Teens Creating Hope. This is where we send kids to camp each year. We're getting ready to do our camp right now. We do 2 weeks, 1 week for smaller kids and 1 week for older kids, where they get to go to camp. It's based on the science of hope. So they're up there being kids for a week with counselors who've all been trained. This year our camp is up, and last year has been up in the Truckee area. We have a comfort dog. He's a Labradoodle. His name is Buddy. He is really good, not only with our clients, but he's also good with staff. We have a health and wellness center. We're starting to provide, we're just in the ground stages of starting our telehealth program. We're partnering with emergency room doctors. So, for example, if a survivor of high-risk domestic violence, maybe that includes strangulation, we can get them straight to the emergency room, immediately see a doctor, be out within 30 minutes or so, be able to get prescriptions for them over here, maybe some lab work, and we partner with some independent pharmacists who's going to work with us on their prescriptions, and we'll pay for those. Just get them the telehealth that they need, or medical help that they need. We have a domestic violence high-risk team. This is where we partner with all law enforcement, medical providers, probation, community-based organization who refer high-risk cases to us. There's a protocol on what is considered a high risk. We get overwhelmed with cases on our high-risk team. We have a hidden homicide project. This is where if there's a case that was maybe a suicide, but the family really feels it was a homicide, we're able to look at those cases. We're working with one now that happened in 2011, which was truly sad. It was we've can say it was literally a homicide, but it was alleged as a suicide. So we're trying to get the cause of death changed. We just created a law. It's called Senate Bill 989. You can look it up in regards to law enforcement when they go out to a suicide. And there's been a history of domestic violence that they look at it as a homicide first. And there's other parts to that. So if you want to look at it, Senate Bill 989. We provide a 56-hour domestic violence training academy a couple times a year. We're getting ready to do it in August. So if you're interested in going through that academy, it's a hybrid. So it's in person and it's also online. You can register there. We provide training to 911 dispatchers, law enforcement, hospitals and healthcare providers, in particular on assessing for high-risk cases, including strangulation cases. We created the first countywide strangulation protocol. It's been a model protocol around the country, and Puerto Rico is using it now, and they're translating it into Spanish. So those are just some other partners that we collaborate with. We participate on the Sacramento County Domestic Violence Prevention Collaborative, the County Domestic Violence Death Review Team, Sacramento Together, and other collaborations. Next slide. So when it comes to assessing for high-risk domestic violence / human trafficking, we here at the Family Justice Center, that really begins at intake. Next slide. So when a survivor comes through our doors, they fill out an intake, and there's some questions on the intake, and then they automatically get connected to a case manager, advocate, whatever term you want to use, social worker, and they go into one of our beautiful counseling rooms, and that's where they hear the survivor's story. They do this risk assessment or this danger assessment with them, In other words, we're very client-centered and trauma-informed. So we don't just put this on a clipboard and ask them these 20 questions. We incorporate it into our conversation. This was created by Dr. Jackie Campbell from Johns Hopkins University. It's a validated danger assessment, and you can really build your safety planning around the scoring results. Again, you want to incorporate this assessment into your discussion versus reading. If you go down to question 10 on number, and these are all in your handouts too. Question 10, it asks about, we use the term choking in here because most survivors use that term. If they mark yes on this or no, you want to have a longer conversation with them, but you want to ask, has anyone ever applied pressure to your neck? And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about strangulation before we close. Have a discussion with them regarding the severity of strangulation. And then if you go to the next slide, there's another questionnaire we'll use here in a minute. But if they, on the very last question, it's not a scoring question. This is really just to see where the client is at. But if they've marked on number 20 that yes, they've considered suicide, you might want to change your intervention with them and do more suicide prevention. Next slide. If they do disclose that they've been strangled, you want to ask them a few more questions. We've developed this form here. It's 10 questions just so we can get a better picture of just how severe their strangulation was to them. We also can use the danger assessment 20 and these questions in a declaration if you're filing a restraining order or a police report or medical report. But we want to know how many times they were strangled. Were they previously strangled? So a lot of times I've noticed that when they fill out the danger assessment or when we're asking those questions and it comes to asking if they've been choked, they might say no. But if you continue to have a discussion around strangulation with them, they might say yes in a previous relationship or a prior time. Number 3 talks about, I didn't highlight that, I'm sorry, but did the strangulation occur while having sex? What we've noticed in particular with youth, it's being glamorized. If you go to all of the websites on strangulation, you'll see strangulation and sex just about everywhere. And then we want to find out if it was consensual or not. Legally, you can't really consent to something that can kill you when it comes to strangulation. So did you experience any of the following while being strangled? So we want to know if there's a change in their vision or hearing or lightheadedness. Sometimes they won't know. Quite often they won't know if they blacked out or passed out. So that would be an indicator that they might have if they don't remember. Then did they lose any bodily functions, like did they urinate or defecate on themselves, or if they were unsure? Was anybody else present while they were being strangled? And just these additional questions here. You just want to get as much information as you can. Next slide. Out of the danger assessment 20, these 5 questions were pulled as 5 high-risk questions. So when you use the 20, that's more in an advocacy role when you have more time to work with them. This is based on that 20 assessment. It's a validated tool. Again, it was primarily developed for healthcare providers or emergency responders. But if someone marks these 5 questions, or even one of these 5, you know you have a pretty high risk case. Has the violence increased in severity? And just note that 80% of cop killers have had a history of domestic violence. 70% of the intimate partner homicides had past abuse, but arrests were only like 10 or 15% of the cases. Has he ever used a weapon against you or threatened you with a weapon? This increases the risk of severity of injury or death by over 500%. Do you think he's capable of killing you? A woman's instincts are the best practice. We also use these on men. I just know this tool was developed primarily for women because of the cases are so severe, but we use it on all of our clients. Has he ever choked / strangled you more than once? So this is really interesting for you to know. 50% of cop killers previously strangled their partners. which may have caused some kind of traumatic brain injury, damage to soft tissue, bones, cartilage, veins, arteries, confusion, and memory problems. If they've been strangled once, they're at 750% chance of being killed. And if there's a weapon involved or strangled more than once, it goes over 1100%. Those of you who were in Sacramento a few years ago, we had a mass shooting downtown Sacramento. Many of those who were the perpetrators of those crimes had a history of domestic violence and had a history of being stranglers. In other words, strangling victims. And if the perpetrator is violently or constantly jealous of them. Over 75% of women who've been killed or almost killed by their partner were previously stalked or killed. So they were in the process of leaving or making a change, and were in the process of leaving, and were at greater risk of being seriously killed or injured, or seriously injured or killed. Excuse me. Next slide. So let's talk about safety planning. No matter what you do, if you're talking with someone where there's domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, elder or child abuse, you should always be doing safety planning. It's just a given. Restraining orders don't save lives necessarily, but safety planning does. Next slide. Sometimes it's uncomfortable for survivors to even start talking about safety planning because, as most of you know, domestic violence is about power and control. In other words, someone maintaining more power and control over another. So the more control a survivor starts to take in their life, the more out of control their partner is liable to become. And that's why it's so dangerous in that process of leaving, because that survivor is taking more control. So their abuser is liable to become more out of control and often get seriously hurt or killed in that process. Next slide. I just put up 7 categories of safety. There's more, but this is what I put up here for you. You want to think about safety during an incident, when they're preparing to leave, after they've left, while they're at home, at work, children, technology. You want to think about when they're pregnant. You want to think about safety with family members. So when preparing to leave, for example, have them think about things like their credit cards, their driver's license, important documents. If they can get the originals, that's fine. But if they have copies, just put it in some of them in a big Ziploc bag. If they can put it in the bag, roll it up and put it in a tampon box where they can have access to it. Keep evidence for your protection order. Keep a journal of the abuse, as long as you have that in a safe place. That should be text messages. Save those, phone voices, messages, photos, evidence on security cameras. This is all stuff that can be used in a declaration as evidence for a restraining order. Next slide. Also remember that health care is self-care. It's part of the safety planning process. Never forget that leaving is the most dangerous time. So when we're being so righteous telling a client that we're concerned for their safety, that they need to leave, we have to make sure that they have a safety plan and that their medical is their first priority. It's not always about staying or leaving. Quite often it's about living or dying. There's many reasons why someone would stay or return. The question shouldn't be why are you staying or why are you returning? The question we should be asking is, what can we do for you? How can we get you and your children connected to resources and safe? And let's see what we can do to hold the person accountable for breaking the law and for hurting you. Safety planning is more than a one-time thing. It's fluid, so it's always changing. Always look at ways to stay safe. So for example, they come in, you meet with them, you talk to them a little bit about what they're doing now to be safe. Now you've referred them for a restraining order. Let's talk about how they can be safe when that restraining order gets served. Now you're asking them to go apply for housing assistance. How can they be safe when they get there? Is the person following them? How can they be safe in their home? So you always want to talk about it. And most of all, you always want to be able to give them hope for a brighter future. Next. This is a safety plan. It's called the Vigor. It's based on the science of hope. I like this more, not when someone is necessarily in a crisis, but this is a tool to really help them when they're developing some goals for themselves. So I really like this doing in our support groups. You have a little bit more time with them. Next one. Now, this is something you can all download on your phones right now. It's called My Plan. I have it on my phone. It's a tool to help with safety decisions if you or someone you care about is experiencing abuse in their relationship. You have to create a 4-digit code. So you want to make sure it's a code that the abuser doesn't have access to. If they happen to get your phone or grab it, they can you can just put in 000 and it goes to this app called Get Organized, like you're organizing your bills. But what I like about this, it's good for advocates. It's good, really good for clients that you work with, because you can do a danger, as an advocate, you could do the danger assessment with them on the side of the road, you know, or in church or somewhere like that. That's just hypothetical, but you could do it anywhere. It doesn't have to necessarily be in the advocate office, but it's a good thing to keep on your phone. Next slide. So when you're doing safety planning, you want to make sure that it also, you're safety planning for the high risk victim. So let's take a few minutes. What does this mean for victims who are strangled? If you go through the next slide. I just want to talk a little bit about strangulation. When domestic violence perpetrators strangle or choke their victims, this is a crime. So strangulation can be charged as a felony assault and be considered attempted homicide. It's the ultimate form of power and control where the batterer really demonstrates control over the victim's next breath, and it can really have devastating psychological effects and a potentially fatal outcome. Just a small amount of pressure around the neck can result in loss of consciousness. Check this out, in 6.8 seconds. Death can occur within 62 seconds all the way to 152. So the neck is very, very fragile. Any kind of pressure applied there, whether it's an arm, a leg, both hands, something ligature, anything, can happen within just a few seconds. Next slide. Victims of non-fatal strangulation are at higher risk of being reassaulted by their abuser or perpetrator, I mentioned this earlier, and 750% more likely of being killed by their abuser. If the perpetrator has access to firearms, the risk of being killed increases to over 1,100%. Next. This is a really good safety plan. We have those here, but you can also go to the Alliance for Hope. You can, and they will put your logo on it and your contact information and get that out to you. But this, so I serve on the Alliance for Hope. It's the umbrella. It's the of all of the family justice centers around the world. So California has 27 of them. With 3 or 4 more opening up here in California. There's about 160 all around the country and the world. Belgium, Iceland, Puerto Rico, all those places have family justice centers. So the Family Justice Center Alliance has committees. They have an advocacy committee, which I co-facilitate. They have a law officers and they have a medical provider. Under our advocacy committee, we had some goals, and one of them was to create a safety plan brochure. So I took the lead on this because there is nothing out there that has safety that's strictly for strangulation. So we created this brochure, and it was peer reviewed many, many times by all of those committees. Our own local voices group peer reviewed it. So it was reviewed by many survivors, and the Office of Violence Against Women also reviewed it. It needs to be updated now. It's not that old, but we're going to put some information in it regarding strangulation and sex. But it talks about safety before strangulation. If you turn to the next slide. And then during and after strangulation. And then there's an interactive piece to it where they can monitor and journal their signs and symptoms, any sensations, and then some phone numbers that they can have available for support. Next slide. This is an additional resource. We just kind of create a strangulation toolkit because so many individuals are being strangled. When we first opened, we had 9 reported cases. We weren't trained in it. We weren't assessed for it. And then now all our staff has had advanced training in it. We changed the whole way we do our assessments here. We assess for it every single day with every client that comes through here. And about 80% of our clients have had some kind of strangulation. But this is in our toolkit too. We, law officers carry our handouts with them too. This is just where you can review the signs and symptoms of strangulation on this handout with survivors. Next. This is the brochure, a brochure that everyone should have. Our officers in Sacramento carry it. They'll put the Alliance for Hope will actually put your logo on it if you ask them. This is facts victims of strangulation need to know. Again, it talks about the seriousness of it, the importance of getting medical attention, and where they can monitor their signs and symptoms. So when survivors come in and they've disclosed that they've been strangled, it's really hard to get them to go to medical attention, because if you, as a survivor myself, I know it's really hard when I'm going from agency to agency, trying to get resources and support, maybe doing a restraining order, talking to an advocate. By the end of the day, I don't want to go to the hospital and get treatment, you know. But if you've been strangled, it's very important that they get what's called a CTA scan, because there's a lot of delayed consequences when it comes to strangulation. Over 50% of victims who have been strangled have no visible signs. So there's a lot of internal injuries that can happen later on down the line. We really recommend that they don't stay alone for 48 to 72 hours, because they can have a stroke and even die. So this is what's called, it's a medical assessment card. And when a survivor comes in, we give this card. On the back of this card is on the next slide, tells you, if you go next slide, right there, it's a notice to the medical provider. So there's an advisory to the patient and then to the medical provider. We have our clients take this card to their healthcare provider and ask that they get a CTA scan. And if their medical provider does not give them one, we ask them to ask their healthcare provider to note that in their medical chart that the hospital refused to do the CTA scan. Because with strangulation, you have two veins. One carries blood up, one carries blood down. Anything that stops the flow of that for 6.8 seconds can kill you, right? Or cause some kind of traumatic brain injury or damage. So we want to make sure that they get this scan, because it really looks at these veins. Next slide. Next slide. So you've had a lot of good information today from both of the other presenters on human trafficking, but there is a marked overlap in the pattern of behaviors that both abusers and traffickers use to exert that power and control over a victim. When it comes to domestic violence, their offenders often use the same kind of power and control tactics that traffickers use to groom and control their victims. So domestic violence and human trafficking deeply impacts men and boys. And the video you saw earlier was just so heartbreaking. I've seen it before. It just breaks my heart. I just want to go get that young boy and adopt him, you know. However, when it comes to domestic violence, quite often they're going home every single night with their partner. And sometimes when it comes to domestic violence, their partners are also trafficking them too. So it presents that double victimization. Next. And domestic violence often happens in private. With trafficking, though, sometimes it happens right out in the open, as you know. And this is about the trauma cycle. Many people who experience domestic violence and trafficking are subject to an ongoing cycle of trauma, you know, and then they have quite often the same kind of similarities, you know, housing stability, instability. They need health care. Maybe there's some substance use, mental health services, you know, all of the wonderful programs that you're all offering them. So it takes a lot, you know. Human trafficking is a dark, dark, dark world. And when we're working with survivors, whether it's domestic violence, elder abuse, trafficking, child abuse, sexual assault, you know, there's a lot of resources that these individuals and support need. And I don't know if you ever heard of the term polyvictimization, but we like to get the big picture of the clients we serve. And quite often we'll find polyvictimization is when, for example, when maybe a kid was being bullied in grade school, and then they get into their teen years. Now they're in a teen dating violence with a different perpetrator. And now they're older and they're in maybe a marriage or an adult relationship, and they have a different perpetrator there. And now they're elderly and maybe they're being abused by their caregiver. So they've had multiple victimizations, which is called polyvictimizations, with several different perpetrators throughout their lifespan. Next. Our human trafficking program, this is our 24-hour hotline, you can call it. We used to get calls from law enforcement, FBI, family members, and of course, survivors. This is the number. That data there on the hotline, that was our first 14 months. I should have updated that because we're up to about 3,000 or 4,000 calls now. We do offer support group for families in partnership with the DA's office. So we do that. We do case management. We partner with the Medical Safe Haven through Dignity Health. They provide all free medical care for survivors and their children. We partner with law enforcement and other community-based organizations. Next slide. Remember, confidentiality should always be at the forefront. Try to meet with clients privately. Some of them want their mom with them, or their neighbor, or their friend, or boyfriend, or girlfriend, or child, which is fine. I get that, but you're going to get a whole totally different story if you have them privately for just a few moments. Note whom you're sharing information with and why. So if you're feeling the need to share information, why are you doing that? Make sure you have that consent of to release information. The domestic violence counselor has what's called victim privilege. It's the California Evidence Code. You can see the code right there, 1037 to 1037-8. The difference between privilege and confidential information arises when, for example, a domestic violence agency is served with a subpoena or court order demanding disclosure of confidential information. A DV agency / counselor and the victim can assert that they have this DV victim counselor privilege and can refuse to disclose. However, there are some times that you're going to have to, especially like when you're mandated to report child abuse and neglect, elder abuse, or dependent abuse, or if someone has disclosed they're going to hurt themselves or somebody else. And then the Safe at Home program, this is in California and other states. It's an address confidentiality program for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault and trafficking. It's not a victim protection program. It's where they sign up through maybe my agency or one of your agencies, and all their mail can be forwarded to the Office of Secretary of State, who in turn can forward it to a confidential address. Next slide. And then some early termination for survivors of breaking their lease to escape domestic violence. This is California has a 14-day notice to quit. If you look on the next slide, I put the forms in here. You do have them as handouts too, but this is the form that they have to fill out to terminate their lease. So I'm a living tenant and they put their name and they're a victim of domestic violence, and they need to have a copy of a temporary restraining order, emergency protective order that was issued in the last 100 days, or a copy of a police report, that kind of form, or documentation. If they don't have that, documentation from a qualified third party, such as a doctor, a psychologist, a licensed clinical social worker, or a domestic violence or sexual assault counselor, verifying that they are a victim of domestic violence. And if you go to the next slide, this is the qualifying third-party statement. So that's the forms there. And the next slide. This is about the third party person, that they meet their requirements. Next slide. Just remember to always do more. So you might be the first person that they've shared their story with, for one thing, and what a gift that is to you. I think one of the greatest gifts that you can give someone is sharing your story, but what's even greater is having that person listen to their story and believing them and not judging them, no matter how bizarre their story is. You might be the first person they've ever told it to. Like I said, I'm a survivor of domestic violence, which included gun violence. And my story is pretty bizarre, and when I had that first person tell me, hear my story, it was like, wow, they believed me, But always ask if any pressure has been applied to your neck, and then help document the abuse. Take the time to observe the victim for some subtle signs and symptoms of strangulation or suffocation. Encourage them to seek that medical attention. Offer hope by educating them about their rights and resources. Conduct those risk assessments, and then educate the victim and others about the seriousness and lethality of consequences of strangulation. Next slide. So if you're going to continue in this work, like I've been in it for almost 40 years, these are some things that you can look forward to in this work. You are making a positive difference. You might not think so, but you are. You get to watch the relief of someone sharing their story in a private, confidential, and safe space. When someone shares their story, in particular for the first time, and you get to watch the relief that they have. Watching survivors turning their pain into power. You're saving lives. You get to be a voice for those who lost theirs. You're creating pathways of hopes for others, and you're offering hope for a brighter future. There's a lot of rewards in this kind of work. And I thank you all for doing it. And then let's look at this next slide. I would like to really offer you a tour of our Family Justice Center. And I'm sure if you're in another county, they would love to give you a tour of their centers. I'd like to offer you to come through our training on our domestic violence, 56-hour training. Take care of yourselves. I know I loved it when our previous presenter, took the time for everyone to just breathe. You heard some heavy topics here, and just what you want to do is learn a little bit about strangulation before you go to lunch. So from the bottom of my heart, as a survivor and as an advocate and a professional in this field for 40 years, I want to thank you for being hope givers and helping others to find their pathway to hope. You are the angels that are floating upon this earth. So thank you very much. And I'll answer any of your questions in the question bar. You get that.
Thanks so much, Joyce. Oh my goodness. I hope you're seeing all the love and thumbs up and applause here from the group. Let's see. We
back
have
to them too.
yes. Thank you all for your engagement throughout all of these presentations. And so we are heading into our Q&A portion, official Q&A portion of the call. There have been several great questions that have come through. And so let me just go here to you directly, Joyce. I know you went through several helpful tools and templates here that practical tools that folks can lean on, but can you please just refresh everyone on what is non-fatal strangulation prevention?
Non-fatal fatal strangulation prevention is really providing that education out there, that the seriousness of it, that people die from it every single day. It's really providing all that education with the tools. I feel that for me personally, I'm a survivor of strangulation too. During my domestic violence, I minimized it. To me, it was getting punched or the name called or making sure my kids are fed. Those were my priorities. The strangulation wasn't a priority to me until I got trained in it. And now that our whole staff is trained in it, it's just something that you have to provide that information to survivors. Because once you got it, I mean, some of you haven't had any of the training. This is new to you today. Just hearing about it and understanding just how fatal it can be within a short amount of time, you have to provide that education to help prevent it. In particular, if you think about our youth, if they're not getting their, when it comes to sex and strangulation, if they're not getting their sexual education, their sex education from their family member or caregiver, who are they getting it from? They're going online and it's glamorizing sex and strangulation, and if you think about it, who is the victim when it comes to sex and strangulation? There's one person, right? That's the one that's being strangled. I had a young man that come to me who said, and this was recently, he said his girlfriend that he was dating wanted him to strangle her during sex. He'd never done anything, but he wanted to please her. He didn't. She almost died, and I know he learned his lesson from that because he was afraid he was going to prison for murder. So it's really educating them. I gave you some really good handouts that if you want more from me, just let me know, because that education, getting trained in it and sharing that information and making sure people are getting the medical treatment they need.
Thank you, Joyce. And again, all of these materials will be shared with you in email, in a follow-up email, and all of our presenters' contact information will be included. And so please do reach out for additional education and training. Joyce, going back to you again on these practical tools, are these strategies and tools that you've presented, gender neutral and inclusive?
The danger assessment too, if you go to Jackie, yes, you can use them for anybody for one thing. You know, we do. But if you go to the website for the danger assessment tool, I think there's one in different languages for one thing. I think there's same-sex one. I'd have to go back and look, but you know, we use them for everybody that we work with.
Sounds good. You heard it all. That is inclusive of all clients. And Rodger, there was a question around Cal VCB, a connected service provider. Can you share more a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, I think so. The great thing is there's a lot of great resources that are available through that program, including especially for individuals that they want their address to be, when they relocate, they want to receive their mail, but they don't want their address to be out in the public. Also, to allows them to register to vote, especially with elections coming up. So there's all sorts of different benefits through Cal that our service providers can help them with. So if they become a client, our case managers are one of those service providers that can connect them with those benefits, which I would think like the Family Justice Center and even Weave probably have case managers that are able to help with that process of those forms and get survivors connected with additional benefits.
Thanks, Rodger. And then there's a question around housing here, and really looking to hear from all of you, but hoping from Joyce specifically and Leander if you're reconnected. So to start off, and then Rodger, feel free to chime in at the end there. Is there something in Sacramento that offers an immediate same-day safe housing? And how do you help someone looking to escape that day?
For Family Justice Center, we don't have a shelter, but we have a contract with the hotel for our high-risk cases, in particular human trafficking, where they can stay for a little bit and until we can get them into a more safe place. You know, nobody comes to the Family Justice Center homeless and leaves homeless. I can guarantee you that. You know, I do want to answer one real quick question on here where it talks about, I understand that physical abuse takes priority. Emotional and psychological abuse is quite often, or even financial abuse can quite often be worse than physical abuse. So, you know, you have to be verbally, mentally, psychologically abused, and then physical abuse often follows that. So, you know, we provide support for all those different types of victimizations.
To add to the question around safe housing, so Weave does offer emergency shelter. Unfortunately, I think I had mentioned this in one of the answers that I put out, was that the need will always outweigh the capacity. So sometimes we may not have the space to be able to shelter everyone who will need it. Not to say that some folks are more important than others. It's just that we encourage our clients to continue calling. Because it's really difficult to predict when space will open up. You know, we can't just also ask folks to pack up and leave right the moment. So that's why we don't do a wait list there. But I think, yeah, the best thing is just to keep trying. There are options available for survivors. If we can't house them, then we'll refer them to FJC or My Sister's House or any other of our community partners that can possibly house them.
There is a question that says, can you have a record and still be on probation and still access services through the Family Justice Center? Yes. A lot of our human trafficking survivors have records and we're going to serve them, you know.
And in a follow-up to that, is it possible for a survivor to go to a safe house or housing outside of the county where they were abused?
They probably should.
And that's one of the nice things with the IRC program is that we do operate in 31 counties, and that is something oftentimes a survivor would want to do for their safety. So we do have those connections in different counties and throughout the nation. So I agree with Joyce. Sometimes survivors may want to stay in the county because of connections and family and employment. Sometimes it might be safer to explore those options of going to a neighboring county or even a neighboring state. So each case is different, and we try to accommodate the needs of those clients.
Thanks, Rodger. Again, going to, this is probably to Joyce. What happens if they are constantly being abused and the victim has been reactive and became abusive as well, and they record the victim to make them see like they are a victim and threatens them to hurt them with that if they leave?
Well, we see this every day. I know we have many, myself included, there's a difference between maintaining power and control over someone versus someone maintaining power and control over the situation. The law requires them also to make arrest of the dominant aggressor. That's so a lot of individuals do fight back, and some, unfortunately, victims do get arrested. But the Family Justice Center is really, really good at advocating on behalf of those clients. It does happen. I mean, it's a natural thing to want to defend yourself when you're being threatened also. So you want to think about that.
Right. Rodger and Leander, anything you'd like to add?
I think Joyce covered it very well. I think it's a very insightful question to know that is happening in society, but also to know that service providers, because we have been in the field this long, have the tools to kind of help us assess who the survivor is and who the person who's doing the exploitation or the abuser is. So there are tools that we use to help us make sure we're helping survivors and not helping perpetrators of these crimes.
This one question here about what's acceptable strangulation play, none is acceptable. There is no play when it comes to strangulation. Okay.
Thanks for calling that out, Joyce. And this is open to you all. Let's see. What do you do when the survivor becomes abusive to staff and case managers?
Sorry, before we move on, I think the language used there in that previous question is really important, because as Joyce said, there is no such thing as strangulation play, but we have had clients before where you have that consensual like choking during sexual acts, right? And I think that's the key piece there is the consent. But when it comes to strangulation, you're talking about you are purposefully harming somebody else, right? So the language that you use there is no such thing as strangulation play, but when working with clients and that does come up, that's really important language to note.
It's also important to note too that you cannot consent to something that can kill you. In particular, strangulation. There's some strangulation laws, excuse me, sex and strangulation laws. Even the what is it, the BDM community or whatever they use,
BDSM?
Yeah, yes, they're doing a lot of training and education on that. We've partnered with them around the country, and they're doing a lot of education on there's just no safe way to strangle someone.
Right.
Okay, it's not safe. So when a survivor becomes abusive to the staff and the case managers, well, we have law enforcement nearby. You have to keep your staff. Clients are going to get frustrated because of what they're going through, and we understand that. But when they cross the line and become abusive themselves, then you have the right to refuse service.
All right, we are close to our wrap up here. We've had a wonderful and very vast information kind of coming at us today, and I know we're headed into our lunch mode here. Any final words of encouragement and final tips for our providers on the call? And I'll start with you, Rodger, and we'll go to Leander and Joyce.
Thank you for that opportunity. And one of the questions I answered directly in the chat was someone was voicing their concerns about a human trafficking survivor and wanting to get that person assistance, but not put that person in jeopardy. I think that's a challenging thing with human trafficking, is that anytime even a service provider or a community member engages with a survivor, that potentially puts that survivor in jeopardy, because the perpetrator is going to lose that income, and that could be very risky for both the survivor and even the person trying to help. So it's really important as concerned caseworkers or just citizens that we make sure that we keep ourselves safe and we listen to what the survivor feels is comfortable. Obviously, if it's a situation where that person's in immediate danger, law enforcement would be appropriate to call. But again, I would encourage us as a society is to listen to the needs of the survivor and respect the boundaries that they set.
Well said, Rodger. Over to you, Leander.
I think I'm just gonna say, please take good care of yourselves today. There was a lot of heavy information, important information, and topics that we covered today. And as we do this work, we often forget that we may also experience that vicarious trauma and carry the burdens of the clients that we serve. So please find some time to practice really intentional self-care today. I appreciate all of you being here and learning with us.
And I agree. Take care of yourselves and go have some chocolate right now. Do something healthy besides drugs or alcohol. Eat some chocolate.
Absolutely.
Eat some chocolate. And I just want to say thank you to your team, Jody, Michelle, and all of you for putting this together, and Rodger and all the Leander, is that how you say your name?
Yes.
Just thank you. You're just amazing. A wealth of information. I always learn from you and Rodger. So thank you, everybody out there. Take care of yourself.
Well,
yes. Thank you to our hosts.
Echo all of those comments. And to just wrap us up here in the next few minutes. Again, thank you to each of you for joining us today and discussing these difficult but very real occurring instances and cases here in Sacramento and across California. We appreciate your engagement with us in the Q&A and these reactions, and with our partners here from International Rescue Committee, Weave, and Family Justice Center. And so, again, we extend gratitude for your insightful presentations today and really sharing more about the relationships between clearly a very vast survivor system here and its link to homelessness. And for many, many ways, these are the entry points to homelessness and vice versa, right? And so it's really important for us to continue having these conversations and be able to better identify and recognize these with our clients that are at risk of entering the homelessness system or are already in the homelessness system. And so with that, your contributions and dedication to this work is certainly appreciated by all of us here, and ensuring that we're educating all of the providers and supporting survivors in their journey to recovery, wherever they might be in their cycle. And so, as we all heard, please do take care of yourselves and have a healthy lunch, a nourishing lunch, and stay cool, stay safe. I know it's also fire season, so please be careful out there and keep up the important, crucial work that you're doing.